during the homily that Laura caught sight of Neil. She was sitting toward the back of the church, a calculated move given the ticking time bomb of her 2-year-old daughter Miranda and her own dislike of churches, which always made her think of death, of futile human striving, of everything in life that was sad. All those grim carvings of saints and the ubiquitous glory specter of the crucifixion, as if she didn't think of her own mortality, her children's mortality, enough. But the service at St. Bernard's this morning had been unavoidable. It included the christening of her college roommate, Jenny Callahan's baby. And it was important to Jenny, the societal ritual of it, the fact that it was taking place in this tony suburban church. Laura leaned against the hard back of the pew and tried to focus her eyes on the world outside the window, on the tiny buds of leaves, the heads of crocuses, the yellow forsythia. Surely this would bring her closer to God than the melancholy drone of the priest's voice. It was considering this that she saw him, not God, but Neil Banks. He was not supposed to be there. That was obvious. Not because the christening was small or intimate, quite the opposite. Big and public was how Jenny lived her life these days. But because of the arrangement, which very specifically precluded any such casual dropping by on Neil's part. He was standing outside the last window on the right, affecting the look of a casual passerby and wearing a beaten leather jacket despite the warmth of the day. He looked skinny, and his hair had turned from sandy blonde to a premature sandy gray. Laura glanced at her husband, Mac, who was surreptitiously checking his BlackBerry as Miranda attempted to climb onto his shoulder, panting slightly with the effort to work a quiet mischief. Beside them, their 6-year-old daughter Genevieve sat coloring, her head bent in concentration. "Be right back," Laura murmured, almost hoping Mac wouldn't hear her, and slid out into the aisle. She ducked her head as if somehow this would render her less visible, and kept her eyes on the carpeting with a vague, hopefully respectful expression plastered on her face. Once through the heavy oak doors and in the cool stone foyer, she felt a quickening of excitement and a breath of relief. Outside it was spring, unseasonably warm, even muggy. An apple tree beside the church was blossoming, fallen petals frilling daintily over the damp black earth beneath. Everywhere there was the faint stench of winter rot, crumpled apples and defrosting dog shit, mud and unearthed metal. Laura filled her lungs with it and felt suddenly free of her husband and children and even her spirited dog, Coco, who was usually at her side when the children weren't. Free of her obligations to be an enthusiastic friend, to coo over the baby and make chit-chat with far-flung family members and acquaintances. It was as if for a moment she could be a college girl again, a bright and lucky 21-year-old skipping class. Was it the weather or seeing Neil that brought this back? She traversed the soggy grass on tiptoe, careful to keep the pointy heels of her new shoes from sinking in. Around the corner of the church, she could see him, still hovering at the window, looking up toward the nave. He had lit a cigarette, and the tarry indoor smell of it muted the springiness of the air. From behind, like this, he looked unchanged, a boy really, rather than a man. Laura hesitated for a moment, aware suddenly of her own altered form. Baby belly she still hadn't lost, hidden under the blousey top she'd bought to conceal it, boring hair, the beginnings of lines between her eyebrows and at the edges of her eyes. She drew a breath. Neil! The figure at the window whirled around, and for a moment the look on his face was so hostile, so defensive, like an unfriendly, startled dog, that Laura stepped backward, sinking one heel into the mud and teetering wildly off balance. Then a softer, sheepish look came over Neil's face. "Jesus, Laura," he said, throwing his cigarette down and grinding it under his heel. He cast an eye around as if maybe there were other, more menacing figures waiting in the wings to apprehend him. "I'm not supposed to be here." I know, Laura was struggling to assimilate this Neil. An older, now that he was facing her, she could see this, more downtrodden Neil, with the one she had been thinking of as she stepped out of the church. "How are you?" He stepped forward and hugged her, and in the quick, slightly rigid embrace he became himself again, the Neil she knew, the Neil she and Jenny had pulled months' worth of all-nighters with in college, drifting in and out of parties, downing drinks in divey bars, The Neil who had, for instance, shown up years ago at her father's house on the vineyard with a trampy 16-year-old coke-addled girlfriend looking for a place to stay. Good, she said breathlessly. I'm good. God, it's been such a long time.